Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Cartus Clinic on Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, supporting the relocating employees. My name is Ashley Winter. I'm a Director of Strategic Business Solutions at Cartus, based in the UK, and I'm really pleased to be moderating the session today. So first of all, thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I'd just like to share some general housekeeping points. Firstly, the event is being recorded, but we'll make the recording available to you after the session. As attendees, all of you will be in listen-only mode for the entire event, but at the end of the session, if we've got the time, we'll be opening it up to the audience for Q&A. So if you do have a question in reference to the topics that are discussed today, or perhaps a comment that you'd like to make, then you can submit that through the Q&A section of the portal at any time. In order to prioritise the answering of questions at the end of the session, please give a question or questions a thumbs up if you'd like to see that specific question answered, and those with the most likes or thumbs up will be answered first. Okay, let's meet our presenters for today. So joining me today, we have two members of the Cartus team, Karen Menendez and Anna Searle. Karen is our Global Director for Cartus Intercultural and Language Solutions. She's been with us for over 20 years and she's responsible for consulting with a wide range of clients on their global talent development needs to support successful international assignments, support global leaders, and also to create globally effective multicultural teams. Prior to joining Cartus, Karen actually lived and worked in Russia, so she does also have that first-hand experience of navigating life in a new country, in a different language, and of course learning how to adapt to a new cultural environment. Anna is our Director of Client Services in the Global Talent Mobility function, and she has over 16 years of industry experience. Anna's a really passionate thought leader with a particular interest in flexible mobility policy and program design, and she's supported a number of organisations through their own transformational journeys. Anna's also a member of the Cartus Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Council. Okay, now that you know who we are, let's get started. So we're really excited to be talking about diversity, equity and inclusion with you all today. Before we get into the detail of the topic itself, I just wanted to take a moment to think about what we mean by diversity, equity and inclusion, and really to recognise that DE&I means different things to different people, depending on their perspective and their cultural lens. Just before the event began today, at 2 o'clock, we asked you all how your organisation labels this topic. So at Cartus, we call it diversity, equity and inclusion, or DE&I for short. And looking in the chat function, I can see a couple of responses here. Someone says, used to call it diversity and inclusion, but recently you adopted the full-fledged diversity, equity and inclusion. Someone else recently joined a firm that calls it diversity, equity and inclusion and belonging. That's nice. And other person has noted that their firm recently rebranded internally from D&I to I&D. I think it's always interesting just to see how different organisations label the topic, so thanks so much to everyone who sent your responses in. But really, regardless of your own internal definition or the label that you apply to it, the topic, I think we'd all agree, is highly relevant to the global mobility space as organisations look to leverage mobility to support their DE&I objectives. At the moment, it certainly feels like lots of us are just seeking to learn as much as possible about DE&I and to try and apply those learnings to our various job roles and responsibilities. Certainly from a Cartus perspective, it's an area that we're focusing a lot of time and resources on, and while we're definitely not claiming to have all of the answers, I think it's fair to say that within the global mobility space, nobody is a DE&I expert at the moment. So the purpose of today, really, from our perspective, we're just hoping to share our experience, our insights, and some ideas with you all. Some of the particular areas that we're going to focus on in the session today include exploring global mobility's vital role in enabling organisations' DE&I strategy, and what practical approaches you can take to enhance DE&I through policy and programme review. We'll also spend some time talking about how you can leverage data to measure and grow diversity, equity and inclusion efforts, as well as making some suggestions of different ways to actually support employee inclusion. One of the other things that we'll be talking through, and it will sort of feature throughout the session today, is surveys that we've undertaken at Cartus. So we know as an organisation that despite the ever-growing influence of DE&I within lots of different companies, many global mobility teams are not really yet at the forefront of that necessary change. So to better understand the role that DE&I plays at both a strategic and a tactical level across various different markets and borders, we conducted a global pulse survey and gathered responses from more than 50 companies worldwide. Now, when we reviewed the data, we found that the majority of respondents actually largely represented US-based work environments. So in order to better understand how DE&I is prioritised in other locations, we took the opportunity to conduct a follow-up pulse survey at the Expat Academy conference in London in September this year. And on that day, we were actually able to collect more than 20 survey responses. So that really gave us the ability to kind of sense check our original global pulse survey results and apply that different cultural UK lens, as it were. Last month, we also conducted a pulse survey in China, and both of these reports will be published shortly, so please do get in touch if you're interested in receiving a copy of either of those surveys or of the global pulse survey if you don't already have a copy of that. I'm now going to turn it over to Karen and Anna, who will do a bit more of a deep dive into both the global and the UK surveys to discuss the ways in which we can improve mobility programmes and policies with regards to DE&I. Anna, I think you're kicking things off.
Thanks, Ashley, and hi to everybody. So some questions that we see organisations ask themselves right now are, how can we better support diverse employees as they move around the world? And what kind of services would benefit employees and their families so that they can enjoy a successful relocation? Through discussions that we've had with our clients, the first thing I want to stress is that DE&I goals vary greatly from one organisation to another, and they're impacted by the industry in which they operate within, the internal company culture, as well as the geographical location in which they operate. So in our survey, we asked people to share how connected their mobility programme is today to their overall DE&I strategy. And the findings, as you can see, were quite similar across both surveys, with 19% from the global survey and 14% from the UK one saying that they felt very connected, and around half shared that they're somewhat connected. What is promising to see is that around 60% of all respondents have plans to address this in the next 2 years in order to better align their organisational DE&I objectives with their mobility goals. So where to start the journey, and how do you take a more strategic approach to managing your mobile workforce? The first step is really understanding the talent profile of those employees currently receiving relocation opportunities. So if we move to the next slide. Thank you. Looking at our surveys, between 62% and 77% of respondents are not currently tracking diversity data as it relates to their mobility programme. And of those that do track what they believe to be relevant data, you can see from the bar chart that the top 3 data points are gender, family profile, and age. And I guess the concern with this and the no numbers on the other data points is that we don't really then understand the racial diversity or LGBTQ+ representation within mobility programs, or employees that have physical disabilities, or perhaps their accompanying family members do. So by tracking more data of those that we support in the mobility programme, companies can better evaluate how diverse their talent pool is or isn't. This isn't about tracking data for the sake of it, but really rather so that we can see where opportunity exists. And then what's most critical is to connect the mobility goals back to the overarching company's DE&I goals. So if I think of some practical applications that we're seeing within our client base and how they use data, one of our oil and gas clients, typically a very male-dominated industry, is tracking gender, as they're specifically keen to increase female representation in their leadership positions. So their mobility goals are really focused on how to better support their female leaders So they've been looking at childcare policies and parental leave benefits they provide. Comparing this to one of our large tech companies who already enjoys a strong gender representation, they have a keen interest in closing the broader socioeconomic gap and are investing in training and programs to support people within disadvantaged communities. So they're helping them develop the skill sets and providing access to opportunities that they might not otherwise have had. And in turn, they're then building the foundation of their future talent pool. Also, if I think to a mobility manager within one of our energy companies, they shared that whilst they're focused on increasing the number of women in their company, they're actually finding it quite a challenge to do so because the wider industry is also challenged in that space. So whilst they might not be able to generate more female assignments because of the landscape in which they're operating, they are still looking within their existing pool at other dimensions of diversity that they can then better leverage and take control over. So you'll see we also asked if assignment acceptance and decline rates were being tracked in relation to DE&I. And this is an area where we saw a bit of a contrast between our main survey and the UK one. And whilst the overwhelming majority don't track, almost a quarter in the UK followed up to share that there are plans to do so in the future. So this is quite encouraging to see because clearly there is opportunity here to gain insights into the reasons why people might be declining assignments, or perhaps even the barriers that might exist that prevents them from applying for a role in the first place. Naturally, the viability of what we can and can't track and be recorded by employers varies and needs to be in accordance with local employment laws. But interestingly, 2 of our tech clients have actually implemented a self-identification initiative. And it's essentially a voluntary and confidential survey that employees can then choose to complete in order to share data that's beyond their demographics, which in turn then helps drive the company's diversity, equity and inclusion efforts globally. And one of the clients actually saw a 62% response rate in their 2020 DE&I report as it relates to self-identification. So by knowing what makes up their employee base, the company and the DE&I leaders can then create more impactful programs, initiatives, provide resources so that we can really meet the needs of everybody and ensure that everybody feels seen and included. Another aspect of DE&I is how to incorporate it into policy reviews and ensuring at a basic there is no discriminatory or exclusionary language in your policies. So only 1/3 of the respondents to our main survey had reviewed their mobility policies to ensure that both the language used and also the services offered are inclusive to all. This is compared to nearly 2/3 of those who we asked as part of our UK Pulse survey. But as we can appreciate, the language is just the start of it. And you can see on the slide here some of the changes that we've seen implemented by clients, making sure it's neutral terminology, so it's inclusive to same-sex partners and different family makeups. Other changes that we've seen incorporated are adding trips for single employees that are going on assignment. That then allows them to bring a friend or a relative over to meet with them at the start or maybe during their assignment once they've settled in that new location. And one client referenced that while they've not yet undertaken a policy review, they have plans to do so, and it will be directly overseen by an in-house DE&I team. So if we take it to the next level and look at it from the programme perspective, mobility managers might want to review with the business the possibility of including multi-generational support as well for parents or caregivers, which, as we know, we see as common in many cultures around the world. And also looking at the programme to see how it can better support single parents so that they feel that they can accept an assignment. One client shared that female employees often accept short-term assignments as opposed to long-term ones, which means that their short-term policies, which typically might have prevented families or caregivers from relocating might perhaps need to be reviewed. And we see this as a particular challenge for single mothers perhaps looking to relocate. Another client is looking to take steps to increase their female assignment population and has conducted quantitative analysis of their relocation metrics. So they're looking at the policy and their move types to see then what policy changes might potentially need to be made. Their analysis found that one particular policy had been offered to female employees around 90% of the time, and that it was a lower level assignment policy. So as we can see, unconscious bias can potentially play a role in the lack of diversity, and some candidates might even disqualify themselves based on their own perceptions and beliefs of what hardships or challenges they might face, or potentially the lack of policy support in order to meet their needs. So it's therefore better, we feel, to proactively review and change your mobility policies and practices in line with your DE&I goals, rather than managing by case or exceptions, just to avoid employees potentially discounting themselves from an opportunity. We're also seeing continued appetite from our clients to inject more flexibility into their programme design and providing a mechanism where employees can select their services and the relo support that's really most important to them and meeting their individual needs. Thank you. We'll now look at duty of care and what this means. So I'll let you review the definition on the slide. But what we really want to recognise here is that this commitment to duty of care becomes even more complex as we consider equal opportunities and inclusive practices in order to support the LGBTQ+ community. I think, many of us know that there are some countries in the world where country law doesn't permit same-sex relationships. So how do you still provide equal opportunity whilst ensuring that you still meet the duty of care obligation? What we feel here is that preparation and education is key, and the duty of care requires that somebody in the organisation, and typically this is often within the mobility function, is aware of country standards for each location in which they send talent, and that this information is then shared ahead of time so that candidates can really make an informed decision about whether they want to take the opportunity or not. On this topic, it's good to see that our respondents indicated a high level of awareness, with 65% saying that they are indeed aware of the different DE&I topics and local environment to ensure that their employees are safe. And 60% of those have also considered ways to address scenarios where a partner might not be able to move to a certain location for safety and security reasons. So some of these alternative ideas are perhaps adopting a split family type approach, whereby the partner either stays in a nearby or neighbouring country, and the company then makes arrangements to have the employee be able to travel on a commuter type assignment so that they can travel there a certain number of times a month. Or others have seen, we've seen them increase the number of home leave trips so that the employee can travel back to the home country if legal restrictions prevent their partner from joining them in that host location. Another consideration really, though, is also to explore, can the assignment be performed from a different location where there aren't the same legal restrictions? Because by then you're still providing the employee with opportunity to benefit from international experience and different cultures. So if your organisation, doesn't have this in-depth knowledge about the different locations, then we highly recommend, you speak to your global legal, immigration and security professionals, or your Cartus team can also help. So I'll now hand over to Karen, who's going to review some of the different ways that we support employee inclusion.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks to those of you joining us today. As someone who's passionate about different cultures and languages, I look forward to sharing my experience and my particular lens on this diversity, equity, and inclusion discussion. Before I jump into the topic on this next slide, back to a point that Anna was making, I was recently speaking with one of my colleagues, an intercultural coach, about diversity, equity, and inclusion challenges in mobility, and she shared an example from an international candidate assessment program that she was facilitating. The employee candidate was considering an assignment in the UAE, and during his discussion with our coach, he disclosed that he was gay and that his company was unaware, and he hoped to have his partner visit him while on assignment. And while we don't get into any legal briefings in our assessment programs, they did talk about the fact that non-heterosexual relationships are still criminalized in the UAE. And they discussed the realities of managing a transition to a country where his authentic self would not be offered the same level of protection as in his home country, and how this would affect his sense of inclusion and well-being. And so they reviewed some possible coping strategies for him and for his partner. But our coach also suggested he might want to disclose his orientation and relationship to his employer from a safety and security perspective. She, of course, kept his disclosure confidential because it's really critical that he self-identify or self-disclose this to his employer. But if he were to share with his company, he and his partner might have more support from the company should he accept the assignment in the UAE, or they might be able to discuss and consider some of those alternatives that Anna suggested. So moving on to this topic of supporting inclusion, clearly inclusion is critical as one of the elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And beyond the ways in which we can adapt our program policies or ensure equity of opportunity across a more diverse talent pool, inclusion is also about ensuring that employees feel heard and valued and are included in ways that enable a feeling of belonging within the organization. I noticed someone in the chat had mentioned that their organization even added belonging to their definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So in a global mobility context, we're moving talent into new work environments and new countries where a sense of belonging or inclusion can be really challenging at the exact time that the need for inclusion is amplified. We've just left a home support network, our known colleagues, a familiar work environment. So relocating employees are facing the challenge of adapting to a new work environment and a new community to which they may not be accustomed and for which they can be unprepared. And they're striving to build new relationships and connections in that community and in the workplace to accomplish assignment objectives and just simply feel settled in their new location. So providing support is really crucial to ensuring that newly relocated employees and all community members for that matter feel valued by the organization and feel a sense of inclusion in their new work environment. In our survey, we asked what type of support organizations are providing to network, connect, and otherwise facilitate the inclusion of newly relocated employees. And we found fairly similar findings from our main survey respondents, where just over half provide opportunities to enable local inclusion in the new environment, as well as from our UK respondents, where just over 60% provide these opportunities. We found that there are a variety of ways in which organizations are supporting newly relocated employee inclusion, and I'll speak to some of the ideas shared by respondents listed here on the slide. But if you have a best practice or some alternative ways that your organization is supporting inclusion for newly relocated employees, please feel free to share that in the Q&A. So some of the ideas shared by respondents in the survey are listed here. Encouraging newly relocated employees to provide their input, their ideas and feedback throughout the onboarding experience via regular catch-up calls or in relocation experience surveys or even annual employee surveys as well. Some are providing an employee onboarding plan, which includes a new hire orientation in the new location, and some are providing local integration support services or even opportunities to connect assignees with local leadership. Others are utilizing employee resource groups or ERGs, and in many cases, these are pre-established company ERGs for any employees. We have our own employee resource groups here at Relogy and at Cartus that are open to all employees, but occasionally our respondents indicated that there are specific ERGs for newly relocated expats and their family members. And this varied in terms of those managed by the organization or those managed by the new arrivals themselves. One of our clients is a consumer goods company, and they have an employee, spouse, and partner-led expat network group. It includes more than 500 members representing more than 40 different countries and cultures. And their local expat networks are quite established in their primary hub locations around the globe. These networks have been really helpful to providing an opportunity for newly relocated employees and their family members in those locations to feel more connected and included in the new community. And groups like this work really well in places where there are a lot of expatriates, but they don't always attract the same level of engagement in locations with smaller assignee populations. They also risk losing momentum if key leaders of those employee or partner-led groups repatriate or move to a new location without a succession plan. So the global mobility function might consider how it can support and enable these kinds of expat ERG groups more. Some also shared that they've established a host buddy or mentorship program, as well as others offering mentoring or network groups for new hires or newly relocated employees. Those included meet and greets. Often it was within the organization for employees or within the community for spouses and partners. One global mobility respondent said that they share a best practices checklist for managers who are receiving relocating employees into their business. And they also have an internal website where employees who have relocated or taken an assignment can connect and share their experiences with others. Beyond employee resource groups and local networks, organizations are also providing cultural training or coaching, which supports the employee and the family as they transition and manage the change associated with living and working in a new country and cultural environment. And even beyond the cultural insight gained, cultural coaches are able to provide local insight to identify and connect employees with local networks. In our coaching programs, this comes up frequently. Coaches are able to recommend local resources for expats. For example, we had a recent female expat who identified herself as gay and was interested in learning more about the gay community in her new home country of Brazil. And our coach was able to support by identifying and recommending local networks and resources and events that might be of interest to this expat as she integrated into her new community. Others provide additional learning and development support or training support focused on diversity and inclusion. Some respondents indicated they're providing unconscious bias training, for example, while others are providing inclusive leadership training. We're working with one client that is headquartered in the Middle East who provides transition-related cross-cultural coaching for employees and their partners, but they also provide targeted leadership coaching for executive-level expats to align with their internal corporate leadership development initiatives and leadership values around building an inclusive culture. So as we talk about coaching, this is, I think, a good segue to our next slide. And global mobility really is a true natural enabler of diversity and inclusion. It's directly supporting talent as talent embarks on assignments around the globe. And in doing so, this talent is often navigating an environment where many may find themselves in the minority for the first time. Mobility also creates opportunity for growth, increasing exposure to diverse ways of working and communicating, as well as the opportunity to develop a more inclusive mindset where cultural differences and approaches are valued and respected. To maximize your company's potential, the potential of that talent base that you're moving across the globe, assignees who are working across different cultures and languages really must be properly equipped to bridge the cultural and linguistic diversity that they encounter. That allows them to thrive on the assignment, both for the employee, but also for the accompanying partners and family members so that they have the knowledge and the tools to manage a transition into a new environment and develop a sense of belonging. And coaching provides these tools. Language and communication coaching for non-native speaking assignees is key to enabling success. This supports overall inclusion efforts. It enables and allows each voice to be heard and understood in a really fundamental way. Language coaching builds capability to communicate effectively, but it also builds confidence, which supports the feeling, that sense of belonging in a new country and a new language. And I want to make a particular note on language, as this point is of course, important in relation to understanding the local language of a host country, as I just mentioned, for building capability and confidence in that new host country language. But there's also a nuance related to English for countries where English is the local language, but also in locations where global English is spoken, which is quite common as the business language around the globe. And this is an often overlooked area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Speaking English as a second language can strongly impact employee inclusion and belonging. We conducted a voice of customer survey for one of our clients, a global apparel company, and we learned from assignees at their global headquarters that many felt excluded from local networks. They felt overlooked and unheard, and some even considered leaving the organization despite having been sent on the assignment to headquarters as a high potential. They shared with us that as English as a second language speakers, they were talked over by native speakers who were often able to use more nuanced or more impactful phrasing in meetings. And in some cases, the native speakers even rephrased the assignee's point in a more effective way and received credit for the idea already posed by the non-native speaker. So of course, those assignees felt unheard and undervalued. They also cited being overlooked for promotions, even if they felt more qualified, and it seemed from their perspective that this was due to an unconscious bias that their English as a second language circumstances made them less qualified. And native English speakers are often blind to this challenge, especially if they haven't studied a second language themselves. So, this applies to assignees in any new linguistic environment, but definitely those who are English as a second language speakers, and native speakers may unconsciously be overlooking these employees' capabilities. Cultural coaching is also critical for the development of cultural awareness, both the awareness of the new environment and its cultural values, but also self-awareness to illuminate our own unconscious cultural biases and to develop strategies to mitigate how cultural differences and biases might impact our success on assignment. When we talk about developing cultural awareness, notions and expectations of leadership and teamwork vary across cultures, and without an understanding of the cultural foundations and values at play in a new cultural environment, or without insight into the expectations of what makes a good leader, or insight into the common norms to motivate or recognize your team, ways to communicate respect and establish trust, the development of this depth of cultural awareness allows globally mobile talent to harness difference to drive multicultural team effectiveness and innovative approaches. And without this insight and support, we do a disservice not only to the employee themselves in terms of accomplishing their objectives, but also to the organization. The lack of cultural awareness can have a lasting negative impact on the organizational culture and the reputation of globally mobile talent. In addition to cultural awareness and cultural insight, self-awareness is key as we learn the basic fact that there are different ways of thinking, different ways of working, different ways of approaching problem solving. The process of gaining self-awareness and cultural awareness in the new environment in a safe and neutral setting with a coach combine together to develop a more culturally aware and culturally competent employee and a more inclusive mindset. And the response to our survey generally supports both of these points. You see here that 71% of respondents provide language or communication coaching for non-native speakers, and 67% of respondents provide coaching for the development of cultural awareness, and more indicated that they plan to do so in the future. I know that Ashley and Anna also mentioned that we recently conducted a discussion with clients in China. What was interesting in that was that in China, this rate was even higher, with 85% indicating that they provide cultural coaching or language training to support success. And the survey responses also had some interesting and strong correlation data between those who are providing cultural or language coaching or plan to, and those who indicated that their mobility or relocation program was very connected or somewhat connected to their overall diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, which Anna spoke about earlier. So of those companies that have a well-connected global mobility and DE&I strategy, 83% of them are providing cultural coaching, and 75% plan to provide or are providing language or communication coaching. In our global survey, we also asked respondents if they draw upon a global pool of employees who have expressed interest in assignments or another form of relocation, and that was just under 40%. Of those who do, we also asked if they believe it has provided a more diverse pool from which to draw talent, and 70% said yes. So these same respondents who are utilizing and drawing upon a more diverse talent pool for global mobility are also providing coaching at a higher rate. 75% provide cultural coaching and 80% were providing language or communication coaching. Similarly, those who indicated that their policies already support a diversity of family structures are providing coaching 89% of the time. And those who are leveraging the expanded skills and mindset of returning talent, which in of itself was a lower number of respondents, but those who do plan for returning talent are providing coaching at a higher rate than the overall respondents as well. 88% of those leveraging the expanded skills and mindset of returning talent are providing cultural coaching for the initial assignment, and 81% are providing language or communication coaching. So clearly, by providing an opportunity to employees and family members for skill development through the support of coaching, we can support and enable diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And those organizations who are providing coaching already may be a little further in their DE&I journey than others. So I mentioned leveraging the expanded skills and mindset of your returning talent, and this is a good time, I think, to move to the next slide. We talked about global mobility being a natural enabler to diversity, equity, and inclusion with the exposure and opportunity for personal and professional growth through an assignment. And leveraging the globally mobile and globally experienced talent is another opportunity for organizations to drive DE&I goals and objectives. Yet in our global survey, only 31% of respondents, 16 respondents, indicated that when global talent returns from an assignment, their organization does indeed leverage that employee's newly developed skills. The majority of those respondents who do so, 10 out of the 16, noted the positive impact of an international assignment on their experience, their skills, and their mindset, and how this positively affected career progression and promotion, providing returning employees with higher and more challenging or more expansive roles. And some of the respondents indicated that global experience is a prerequisite to promotion. In terms of how the respondents' organizations are leveraging the employees' knowledge and skills upon return, their responses were mixed. Some were unaware of how the business was managing this. Other respondents, however, indicated that their organization uses internal coaching or mentoring programs to support returning talent and best leverage their skills. One client that we've worked with where global experience is critical to their career progression and leadership development actually provides globally mobile talent with a home country sponsor and a mentor in leadership outside of their home country, enabling connection for that employee and reinforcing the likelihood that that talent won't get lost upon return home. Others are connecting employees with counselors prior to and after repatriation to provide continuous support, including post-repatriation coaching. We do this for several organizations, and we've found that the returning talent feel valued simply by way of the organization offering repatriation coaching. So with that and the coaching they receive on how to best leverage their experience and skills, it's really a win-win for employee inclusion and for the organization's benefit for talent retention and DE&I goals. And when we consider that an international assignment creates multiple opportunities for relocating employees to grow personally and professionally, they're exposed to diverse ways of working, communicating, they have the opportunity to develop a more inclusive mindset, and we also consider the significant investment in globally mobile talent, organizations can really benefit by leveraging the skills and experience gained by returning employees, and in doing so, foster a more diverse and inclusive work environment. In fact, previous studies that we've reviewed have shown that the lack of corporate interest in showcasing or utilizing expat learnings and expanded capabilities when they return home frequently results in attrition from the organization. So there's much to be gained and mitigated by leveraging an assignee's broadened perspective, more inclusive mindset post-assignment. And many organizations have yet to act on this phase of the assignment cycle. So this is an area of opportunity for global mobility. With that, I thank you, and I will hand back to Ashley.
Thanks, Karen. And thank you so much to yourself and also to Anna for talking us through the surveys and for sharing all of those valuable insights and examples. I think it's very clear that both through our DE&I pulse surveys and in discussions with our clients that there really is no one-size-fits-all approach. The diversity, equity and inclusion goals of each organisation really can vary significantly based on industry sector, culture, and of course also geographical location. So it's absolutely essential that each company's mobility goals closely align with the company's overall DE&I objectives. As we at Cartus continue along this DE&I journey of helping our clients to create truly diverse, equitable and inclusive mobility programs, we're seeking ways to ensure that any previous diversity and inclusion barriers are removed. So if some of you today are listening and you're just beginning your journey, I'd like to just close this session today by sharing some key concepts for you to consider. First of all, when you're thinking about your program objectives, consider your overall mobility program and think about your DE&I priorities and goals. For example, if your priority is to grow diverse representation within your mobility program, then develop mechanisms to measure and analyze and really to enable you to act on insights around your mobility population and your overall talent pool. Take the time to understand DE&I employee concerns and the different priorities that they have by collecting and reviewing feedback from a diverse population of employees. And with that, I would specifically say, you should reach out to both employees who actually did relocate and also those who chose to decline the offer for whatever reason. And reaching out to both of those groups will help you to better understand any barriers that might be in place to a successful relocation from a DE&I perspective. You can also think about ways to improve your mobility program visibility through leveraging technology, because technology really enables you to reach that wider, more diverse population of your employees and helps to sort of drive those DE&I goals for the business. I think it's also important to consider the framework that you have in place. So what I mean by that is have a think when you're listing opportunities or talking to people about opportunities to relocate. Are they truly visible to all employees? Are the employee selection processes that you have in place diverse and unbiased? Consider studying your current and your future mobility locations and really analyze whether all company talent can actually move to all of the locations that you're doing business in. And if that's not possible, then what steps can you take to change that, or what can you do to address some of the challenges of those locations? So are there specific locations where employees may be unable to relocate due to their family makeup or their sexual orientation, like the example that Karen mentioned with moving an LGBTQ+ employee into the Middle East? And if that's the case, and those are the barriers that you're facing, try and think about other alternative options that you can explore, such as different locations or different opportunities, perhaps virtual assignments or business travel, to make sure that everyone that's involved in mobility has equal opportunity for career development, regardless of their personal circumstances. So to ensure that everyone interested in relocating is equally considered, we'd encourage you to develop enterprise-wide talent pools to really increase those options. And ask yourselves if a truly diverse group of employees really have been considered for each assignment opportunity. Like I said, is mobility truly accessible to all of your employees? Do the current recruitment and selection processes allow for the inclusion of a broad spectrum of candidates? Now that we're just starting, or lots of organisations are just starting to really think about aligning their DE&I objectives to their mobility programs, this is a really good opportunity for you to take a step back and pressure test your mobility selection process against that unconscious bias. When it comes to policy and general support optimization, once a diverse candidate is selected, you then have to think about how your organisation can ensure that the support provided will really meet their personal needs. There are various different things you can do here. So taking it from a sort of practical perspective, as Anna mentioned, you can review your policies with a DE&I lens. Are the policy offerings and the language that you're using truly inclusive of everyone within your employee base? Do words like family perhaps need to be redefined? You could also consider the utilisation of a flexible policy framework, like a Core Flex programme, for example. Appreciate that might also be a cultural shift for your organisation in a different way, but these kind of programmes can really help employees select and define the benefits that best support them and their family. To Anna's earlier example, one size really doesn't fit all, and giving those flexible options to employees mean that single parent families or people who are in LGBTQ+ relationships, or perhaps people who need to relocate with their adult children, are included and are able to tailor their support package to make sure that they have the same opportunity as everyone else for their relocation to be successful. Finally, we also encourage you to consider employee preparation and career-focused support for your assignees while they're actually on assignment. So things like early immigration, tax and security briefings are really critical to ensuring that employees have a holistic understanding of their legal status and of that new environment, so to help sort of set and manage their expectations and help them to appropriately prepare for the transition. As Karen talked a lot about, intercultural coaching really delivers the tools to help employees and their families manage those transitions across cultures as they embark on assignments, and gives them the ability to recognise what's appropriate and what will work best for them in that different new context. Karen also mentioned that targeted language training and that support is equally as important in supporting that cultural transition in a really fundamental way, actually. And finally, consider what support networks can be made available to employees in the host locations. So within your own organisation, you may already have things in place like mentorship programs, employee resource groups, but you can also think about stepping outside of that and looking within the host location to perhaps local networks that might be available. All of these things can be a really vital source of support and true enablers of inclusion for your employees when they're considering going on assignment. Just as a really, I guess, a final thought from us today, we'd just like to kind of reiterate the point that I made at the beginning, that nobody is an expert here. We're all kind of on the journey, and fundamentally, you should recognise that it is a journey, and including sort of DE&I into your mobility policy is not a one-time event. So at this point, you can really take the time now to focus on, I guess, meaningful and measurable steps that you can take towards greater inclusion over the coming years. So we're getting to the end of the session today. We've got 10 minutes left, so it seems like a good time to open the floor to any Q&A that we have. Let me just have a look and see what we've got there. So the first question I can see is, are you seeing a lot of regional differences in how organisations in different parts of the world are approaching diversity, equity and inclusion? Yes, I mean, hopefully we've answered a little bit of that today, but there's definitely a regional lens, and initiatives are also different, right, based on the cultural context of the company that you're speaking with or that you're working for. From a kind of regional perspective, for example, in the US, typically we see DE&I priorities like rights and civil liberties with a racial and gender diversity focus. In EMEA, generally speaking, we're seeing gender and ethnicity as the main DE&I priorities. But I think I would say, regardless of the trends that we're seeing and all the things that we've just talked about, we shouldn't make assumptions about what DE&I looks like for any individual person, although perhaps it's a good starting point to help you get the conversation going. Let me see what else we have. In your experience, would you say that the majority of Cartus clients have a strong diversity and inclusion focus? Anna or Karen, I don't know if you'd like to answer that one.
Sure, I can take that one. I'll say, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think as we mentioned at the beginning, the topic of DE&I has been around for decades. One client started their journey in the 80s. And I think what we're seeing is now that interest and passion and broad focus, I guess, of DE&I across their organisations. And now what the change is more linking it to the mobility sphere. So yeah, I would say absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you so much for responding. I'm just having a look in the chat function now. In your opinion, what's the first few steps a mobility team should take when starting out their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey? I can sort of kick this one off, and then perhaps Anna and Karen, you can add to it. I mean, firstly, I'd say take a step back and look at your program today and try and do a bit of a gap analysis. So what insights can you gather from your program as it is right now? What measures do you perhaps already have in place that support DE&I? But then think about what your objectives are and where you'd like to get to from a DE&I perspective. So once you know what your goals are, you can work back from that and start identifying where the gaps are within your program. And once you've identified the gaps, you can begin to kind of fully build out your DE&I strategy and kind of map out that journey.
I guess to add on to your point, Ashley, that you know, it's definitely a journey, but as I shared in my area when we look at the policy reviews, that there are also some quick wins that organisations can achieve by taking that review of their global mobility policies, you know, checking the language is, you know, that is used in your policies is truly inclusive, as a quick win, you know, and then you can look at some of the broader and bigger changes, I guess, in terms of restructuring your program design, you know, injecting that flexibility into your policies, conducting market reviews on, you know, competitiveness and comp allowances that are provided to support the different situations. Don't know if you had anything else to add, Karen?
Yeah, I can add, you know, from my lens and perspective, I'd recommend just ensuring, you know, as Ashley mentioned, review your program and policies, but ensure that you're providing assignees and their family members with support that truly allows them to integrate into the new environment, to understand their own values and biases from a cultural perspective, and learn about the new culture, its values, and the differences of how business is conducted or how communication is managed locally, the language, of course, and all of that will prepare your talent so that they can really build new relationships in that environment, build connections based on trust and respect, and, you know, ultimately be more effective and really thrive in this new community that they're living in.
Great, thanks, guys. The next sort of voted up question is, what DE&I policies or initiatives are your clients implementing internally at a corporate level?
Ashley, I can share a response here. I know that, you know, we've spoken with many of our clients about what they're doing at a corporate level from a learning perspective, and many are offering unconscious bias training across the organization. We've recently received many requests for taking that a step further for broad multicultural or cultural awareness training internally. I know that we've also looked at some of the DE&I policies from some of our tech clients that Anna spoke about earlier. And in some of those programs, you know, they're encouraging their employees to create an annual DE&I statement for themselves for the year ahead. And even beyond the employees, we're seeing an increasing, you know, inclusion of a measure in leadership behaviors and performance reviews related to being an inclusive leader, you know, demonstrating inclusive behaviors. I think I shared an example of one client that is that has a leadership development initiative and values around an inclusive culture, and they provide targeted coaching around inclusive leadership. And then ERGs as well. I know we have many clients that I think are expanding those employee resource groups. They've long played a role in our company's, corporate, workforce setting for the employees, but they seem to be expanding and broadening in their prominence, as we talked about in our session. The other thing that I've picked up on, we've noticed more and more clients and employees using their preferred pronouns in email signatures, and that also, I think, supports just general inclusion across the organization.
That's great, thanks, Karen. Let me see what else we've got in the chat. Could we summarize some kinds of questions or requests for support that we get from either clients or as part of, I guess, RFP process generally? I think I can probably answer that. Companies generally, in terms of RFPs, are looking for cultural alignment between organizations, and to know that the relocation partner they're working with focuses, I think, not only on DE&I within their own organization, but also through their global supply chain. So, for example, we often get questions about whether or not we have a supplier diversity program or particular goals, perhaps, with respect to supplier diversity and ensuring inclusivity. I'd say beyond that, actually, I'm quite trying at the moment, we get a lot of questions on our policy with respect to corporate citizenship and our broader commitment to social issues. And in terms of our clients that we're working with today, I think it's fair to say that they're just really keen to know what everyone else is doing. So we get asked a lot for benchmarking, to get ideas on how to improve mobility programs and how to support their people. The two, I guess, probably main areas of focus are policy language to help that it's more inclusive, and then support in creating that flexible policy framework that, like I said earlier, enables the employee to self-select their relocation package that meets their own personal needs a bit better. Do we have any more questions? What are your top tips to manage cost constraints while trying to improve the DE&I profile of your GM program? I mean, some of the things that we've touched on today, like changing the policy language, not necessarily the policy offering, is something that we've seen lots of organizations do relatively quickly, I would say. It's not something that necessarily incurs much of a cost. The other thing, and we've only very briefly touched on this today, it's a whole topic in itself, is moving to a more flexible mobility framework. So those kinds of core flex policies tend to, in addition to bringing more employee satisfaction because the employee is able to choose benefits that best suit their personal circumstances, also bring the opportunity of cost containment by offering the opportunity for the employees to choose certain benefits rather than more traditional policies where there are a full suite of benefits on offer, for example. I don't know if Karen or Anna have anything to add to that. Those are my initial thoughts.
I would just add, Ashley, I think you raised a good point about the review of the policy language. There's no real cost to that. But in addition to that, sort of reviewing the employee selection process and the visibility of opportunity that you mentioned, that in of itself shouldn't increase costs. It can help manage costs, but allow a more diverse pool of candidates to come forward for opportunities.
Great. Well, Anna, if you don't have anything else to add, I see that we're right at the top of the hour. So I think that's probably a good place to finish the session today. So I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for joining us, and a huge thank you again to Anna and Karen for sharing all of their insights. And to all of the attendees who did join us today, look out for communication in the next week that will include a recording of the session. And of course, if you have any other questions or you'd like to talk about this topic a bit more, please reach out to us directly, and we'd be really happy to have a discussion with you. So with that, just enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.